Mark Peterson had dreamed of Willow Creek Estate long before he could afford it. In every glossy real estate brochure, Willow Creek looked like a sanctuary, manicured lawns stretching like green velvet, winding streets named after flowers, and a big iron gate at the entrance that seemed to promise safety from everything ugly in the world. Mark needed that promise more than most people ever would. His son, Danny, was born with an immune disorder so cruel and rare that Mark's insurance company didn't even cover half the treatments. Since the day Danny came home from the hospital, Mark and his wife, Sarah, had lived life on high alert, every cough a threat, every flu season a nightmare. They learned to sterilize toys, wipe every doorknob, and keep visitors away if they so much as sniffled. When Mark finally got the promotion that let him buy a house in Willow Creek, he thought he'd finally outrun the fear. Here, he could build Danny a room so pure that no germ could find him. He spent almost every weekend at the hardware store, hauling back air purifiers, high-grade filters, custom HVAC parts. Contractors came and went. Neighbors peered from behind blinds as he supervised every screw, every seal, every inch of ductwork. Some people even applauded him for being such a dedicated father. Mark didn't care for applause. He cared that for the first time in his short life, Danny could play with his Lego sets on the clean white floor without a face mask on. On warm evenings, Mark liked to stand in the backyard under the huge oak tree that shaded half the lawn. He'd watch Sarah chase Danny around in his little bio-bubble suit, laughing when the boy squealed as she swooped him up in her arms. They looked almost normal then, like any other family, and for Mark, that illusion was worth every sleepless night at work. But illusions crack where you least expect them to. One Monday morning, Mark was halfway through replacing the last section of Danny's air intake vent when a shadow fell across his driveway. He turned and saw a woman he'd never met before, though he'd seen her pass by a dozen times. Tall, perfectly ironed white blouse, pearls at her throat, hair pinned so tight it seemed painful. She smiled as if it hurt her mouth to do it. "Good morning, Mr. Peterson, isn't it?" she said. Her voice was as sweet as poison. She introduced herself as Brenda Collins, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. Before Mark could offer her a chair or a cup of coffee, she lifted a clipboard as if it were a judge's gavel. "I couldn't help but notice," she began, tapping the pen against the metal vent beside him, "these new air filters you've installed." Mark, sweat dripping from his forehead, explained without hesitation how Danny needed filtered air, how these units made the house safer than a hospital. He thought he was sharing something human, something any neighbor would understand. Brenda's smile didn't change at all. She just nodded, flipped through a sheaf of typed pages, and handed him a bright yellow violation slip. "I'm afraid they violate our exterior modification guidelines," she said, as if reading from a textbook. "They must be removed by Friday." Mark stared at her, not comprehending. "Removed? These protect my son's life. He's immunocompromised." "I can't," Brenda spoke over him, gentle but firm. "Oh, we do sympathize, Mr. Peterson, truly. But rules create harmony. Exceptions lead to chaos, and Willow Creek is proud to be chaos-free." She walked back to her shiny black SUV without another word, leaving Mark standing by the vent he'd spent half his savings installing, the slip crumpled in his shaking hand. Inside the house, Danny giggled at his cartoons, oblivious. Mark pressed his palm to the window glass, watching the little boy who trusted him to keep monsters away. Outside, behind freshly trimmed hedges and rose bushes, the real monster smiled behind the wheel of a spotless SUV and dialed the next number. On her list, Mark didn't sleep much after Brenda's visit. He spent the whole night at his desk, going over the HOA guidelines line by line, highlighter smearing every page yellow. He found the section on exterior modifications, found the vague clause about neighborhood harmony, and found exactly 0 exceptions for medical emergencies. At 3 in the morning, Mark sat back, eyes burning, realizing what he was really up against. He'd seen tyrants before, bad bosses, petty supervisors, but none of them had threatened his child's life with a smile and a clipboard. The next day, he tried to be reasonable. He called Brenda's office and left a calm message explaining Danny's condition in detail. He attached doctor's notes and photos of the medical equipment. He offered to paint the units the exact same color as the house so they'd blend in. He even offered to build a wooden screen to hide them from the street. No answer came. When he called again, Brenda's secretary said she was in a meeting and would get back to him. She did in single quotes T. Mark started knocking on doors instead. He went to 3 other board members' houses in one afternoon. A retired dentist, an elderly couple who didn't even remember voting for Brenda in the first place, and a young guy named Trevor who mostly joined the board to pad his resume. Mark pleaded with them, "Come see Danny's room. See how sick he is. Help me out here, please. He's just a kid." They nodded politely, said they'd talk to Brenda, then closed their doors and peeked through the blinds until he left. When Friday arrived, Mark hadn't removed a single bolt. He couldn't. The fine started exactly at midnight. A letter on fancy letterhead appeared on his porch, typed in cold legal language. Daily fine, $500. Additional fine for non-compliance, $1,000. Sarah cried when she read it. "How can they do this to us?" she whispered, clutching the paper in shaking hands. Mark hugged her, even though he felt hollow inside. He wanted to tell her he had a plan, but the truth was he didn't. Not yet. The next morning, he found 2 men in neon vests loitering by his front gate. They looked official, carrying toolkits and clipboards. Mark stepped outside and asked what they were doing. The taller one didn't even look him in the eye. "HOA inspection, sir. We have the right to assess compliance. If you interfere, that's an additional violation." Mark tried to block the gate. The shorter man pushed past him like he didn't exist. They circled the house, jotting notes, taking photos of the air units, the gutter, the mailbox. Every little thing became a line on a new violation sheet. Then they reached the main external filter box, the same one that made Danny's air safe to breathe. Mark watched in disbelief as the taller man bent down and popped open the panel. "Hey, don't touch that," Mark shouted. He lunged forward, but the other man blocked him with an arm across the chest. The inspector twisted a wire, flipped a switch, and the filter unit fell silent. "You can't just shut that off." "My son," Mark's voice cracked with rage. His fists balled up, ready to swing. But he froze when the man turned back and said flatly, "Take it up with the board, sir. We're just doing our job." By the time Mark got the unit restarted, it was too late. Danny, sleeping peacefully upstairs, woke with a nosebleed and a cough so raw that Sarah called 911 without thinking twice. As the ambulance pulled away, siren howling down Willow Creek's perfect rows of houses, Mark stood on his driveway staring at the inspector's truck. They sat inside, laughing at something on a phone screen, waiting to file their final report. In that moment, Mark understood the real rules of Willow Creek. They would protect their lawns, their uniform fences, their perfect flower beds, even if it killed his boy. He also realized something else. He would not forgive them for this, ever. The hospital's hallway chairs felt like concrete. Mark sat slumped in one, head resting against the cool white wall while fluorescent lights hummed above. He could hear Danny's muffled cries every now and then through the closed door. Sarah hadn't left their son's bedside in hours. She clutched his hand and whispered soft promises that everything would be okay, though even she didn't believe it anymore. Mark's phone buzzed in his pocket. He expected another cold HOA email, or maybe a new fine to salt the wound. Instead, it was an unknown number. He answered with a voice that barely sounded like his own. "Mark, it's Trevor, from the board." Mark sat up, surprised. "Trevor, what do you want?" Trevor sounded nervous, like he was whispering from his own garage so no one would hear him. "Listen, I shouldn't be calling. But what they did, the inspectors, cutting off your system, that's not even legal. Brenda ordered it anyway." Mark's throat tightened. He stared through the glass at the nurses adjusting Danny's for drip. "Why are you telling me this? Because I'm not like them, okay? I just wanted to fluff my resume. I never thought she'd push it this far. But Mark, they're not going to stop. She's already planning to foreclose on you. Says it's an example, scare people into obeying the bylaws." Mark's vision swam. He pressed a knuckle to his temple to keep from shouting. "Foreclosed on my son's house because of air filters? She doesn't care. Man, to her, you're a nuisance. If she breaks you, no one else fights back. She's done it before. A family on Rosemont Lane had to leave after she bled them dry with fines. I'm telling you because your boy doesn't deserve this." Trevor hung up before Mark could ask for more. The call left him with a truth worse than any fine. There would be no mercy. Not while Brenda wore her fake smile and iron blouse. When Danny finally fell asleep, weak but stable, Mark and Sarah drove home in silence. The house felt wrong, like an open wound that Brenda could prod anytime she pleased. Sarah stood by the kitchen sink, staring at the pile of new violation letters scattered on the counter. She didn't speak. She just wiped tears off her cheeks with her sleeve. Mark walked into Danny's room, the sealed sanctuary he'd built with every extra hour of overtime, every sacrifice of sleep, every missed holiday. He touched the edge of Danny's little bed, then his fingers curled into a fist so tight his knuckles cracked. He knew he couldn't fight Brenda in the open. She owned the bylaws, the fines, the inspectors, even the nosy neighbors who turned on him the second they thought their property values were at risk. But what she didn't own, not yet, was the debt hidden behind Willow Creek's perfect white fences. Mark spent the next nights combing public records until dawn. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat much. He just cross-checked every mortgage, every foreclosure notice, every name connected to Brenda's pet circle. The truth lay buried in quiet desperation. People stretched too thin for showy renovations. Backyard pools, luxury SUVs, a few late payments here, a balloon payment there. All the dominoes waiting for the right nudge. One evening, he called an old friend from college, Eric Wallace, a real estate lawyer who owed him more than one favor. Mark explained everything, every fine, every sneer on Brenda's lips. Eric whistled loud. "You want to sue them, buddy?" Mark stared at Danny's latest hospital bill. His voice was calm as a storm's. No, I want to buy them." Eric laughed, then stopped when he heard Mark didn't laugh with him. "Seriously, Mark? You're talking big money? You sure you want to?" "I'll get the money. I'll get every dollar. I just need you to find me the cracks. And when you do, I'll own her right out from under her pearls." For the first time in weeks, Mark's reflection in the kitchen window didn't look helpless anymore. It looked patient and hungry. Mark barely slept in the day. He pretended normalcy, drove Danny to checkups, reassured Sarah, answered neighbors, polite nods with forced smiles. But each night, after the family was asleep, Mark sat in the soft glow of his laptop with spreadsheets, and title searches spread across the table like a general's battle plans. Eric worked fast. By the end of the week, he had a file thicker than Brenda's beloved HOA rulebook. Mark read every page until the numbers blurred. Second mortgages disguised as renovation loans. Overdue taxes masked behind refinancing. Families bragging about granite kitchens while their equity shriveled behind closed doors. It was a neighborhood of pretty lies. Mark was ready to weaponize each one. He started with the Hendricks family, Brenda's loyal supporters. The ones who'd once snickered when inspectors shut off Danny's filter unit. Their mortgage sat on a high-interest arm that was about to spike. They didn't know Mark had already arranged a private investor to buy the note from the bank. On a calm Thursday morning, the Hendricks found a crisp letter in their mailbox. An official notice from a company they'd never heard of. The letter was polite, but final. Their mortgage had been acquired, and the new holder expected the past due balance immediately, or else foreclosure proceedings would begin within 60 days. The panic spread fast. By Friday, Mark heard from Trevor that Brenda was holding emergency meetings behind her neat white door. The Hendricks called her 3 times in tears. Brenda faked concern and blamed predatory lenders. But Mark knew her mask was slipping. One domino down. Next were the Bennetts. Their pool, the one that doubled as the HOA's summer party centerpiece, had been financed on a home equity line they'd maxed out twice. Mark's investor friend bought that debt too. A new notice arrived at their door, polite and merciless. Pay up or prepare to list the house. Mark watched them from his driveway that evening, peeking through parted blinds as the couple shouted at each other on their porch. The HOA president's grip was weakening, and everyone could feel it. He still smiled and waved to neighbors like nothing had changed. He even brought Danny out to play in the yard more often. People who once crossed the street to avoid awkward chats now lingered by his fence, asking if he'd heard about the new mortgage letters popping up around the block. Mark shrugged, offering innocent sympathy. He felt no guilt. They hadn't cared when his son bled on an ambulance gurney. In the evenings, Sarah sometimes found him in the garage, sitting on an old camping chair staring at the boxes of air filters stacked along the wall. "Is this really helping?" she asked one night, her voice a fragile thread. "Are you sure you're not just making it worse for us?" Mark kissed her forehead and pulled her close. "I'm making sure no one ever holds a piece of paper over Danny's life again. Not Brenda, not this HOA, not anyone." Sarah wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that the man who once mowed lawns to save for college still lived inside this tired stranger with red eyes and clenched fists, so she said nothing more. One by one, houses in Willow Creek quivered on the brink of sale signs. Brenda held emergency HOA meetings twice a week now, standing at her marble kitchen island, voice dripping fake reassurance while she quietly begged board members to stay loyal. Trevor secretly fed Mark every new rumor she spread about him. How she painted him as a ruthless, unstable father who would destroy the community. Mark didn't care. He decided long ago he would wear every cruel name she gave him, so long as Danny slept safe. In his room, unafraid to breathe. Outside, Willow Creek's hedges were trimmed to perfection. But underneath, the roots were rotting, and Mark was the one wielding the axe. Summer came early to Willow Creek that year. By June, the sun scorched the emerald lawns and pushed tempers to their breaking point. Neighbors once obsessed with patio furniture now whispered behind hedges about letters they couldn't afford to ignore. Mark watched the unraveling from his front porch, feet propped on the railing. Danny playing in the yard under the big oak tree. From where he sat, Mark could see 2 for sale signs that hadn't existed a month ago. The Bennett's Colonial and the Hendricks Ranch, both stripped of their HOA glow and repainted in desperation. Trevor fed him updates daily. Brenda's phone rang all night with complaints. How could she let this happen? Who was behind these sudden mortgage buyouts? Brenda lied with a bright smile at block meetings, insisting the community was fine, even as cracks split the perfect picture. One humid evening, Mark and Sarah sat at their dining table while Danny slept in his filtered sanctuary. Sarah laid out the hospital bills in neat stacks, her brows drawn tight. I can't keep track of which cards we're using for which copays anymore, she whispered. I know you say this plan will fix everything, but Mark, what if it doesn't? Mark didn't answer right away. He looked at her. Really looked. The lines worry had carved at the corners of her mouth, the dark circles under her eyes. He knew she hadn't slept a full night since Danny's first breath. It will work, he said finally, voice low but unshakable. By the time school starts, Brenda won't control a single house on this block. And when she doesn't own loyalty, she owns nothing. Sarah rubbed her temples, exhausted by the war he'd brought to their doorstep. But deep down, some part of her, the part that watched Danny laugh freely under filtered air, trusted him. While Brenda scrambled to keep her circle intact, Mark moved faster. He pressured banks through shell companies, leveraged every dollar of his retirement, borrowed on credit lines so tangled no one could trace them back to him. Eric, the lawyer, called every few days to caution him. Mark, this is nuclear. If Brenda ever finds out you're the one she won't, Mark cut in. And even if she does, she can't stop it. Each new foreclosure threat struck fear into the tight-knit cluster of families who once congratulated themselves for living behind a gate. With each letter, old alliances fractured. The Bennetts blamed the Hendricks for tipping off the banks, the Hendricks blamed the board, and everyone blamed Brenda for letting it happen. Meanwhile, Mark walked Danny to the park again. People who once crossed the street now avoided eye contact, altogether terrified that a polite chat might make them next on the mystery buyers list. A few bold ones cornered Brenda at the HOA office, demanding answers, refunds for legal fees, or simply someone to blame for the ruin eating there. Perfect lawns from the inside out. Trevor, meanwhile, fed Mark tidbits of Brenda's personal panic. She'd pulled equity from her own home 3 times over the years, a secret she never shared at her monthly financial responsibility workshops. Now, cornered, she dipped into that equity again, convinced she could buy back loyalty with hush money and promises. But Mark already had eyes on her deed too. One sticky Thursday, Mark got a text from Trevor. Just 2 words, she knows. Brenda had finally put the puzzle together. The same father she'd humiliated was the ghost, buying her kingdom piece by piece. She called an emergency meeting at the clubhouse that night, ordering every homeowner to attend. She wanted to rally them one last time, to cast Mark out as the villain poisoning their Eden. Mark stood at his window, looking out at Willow Creek's neat streetlights flickering under the summer dusk. Sarah watched him from the hallway, worry carved deep into her posture. Are you going? She asked. Mark didn't turn around. His voice was so calm it scared even him. Oh, I'm not just going. I'm going to help them decide who really owns Willow Creek. The clubhouse hadn't been this packed since Willow Creek's Spring Festival 3 years ago. Back then, everyone had come for lemonade and finger sandwiches under string lights. Tonight, they came armed with rumors, rage, and the same question burning behind every polite smile. Who was destroying them? From the inside out? Mark parked 2 blocks away. He could have walked straight up the front steps like anyone else, but he wanted to approach unseen, to feel the mood from the shadows. Before stepping into the center of it all, he could hear Brenda's voice before he even reached the door. Bright, sharp, carrying easily through the humid night. This outsider, this parasite, he thinks he can buy our homes, our security, our way of life. Are we going to stand for it? A weak cheer followed, more confused than confident. Mark stepped closer, leaning against the side window, where he could see the scene inside, Brenda at the front, pearls gleaming at her throat, her fingers stabbing the air as she painted him as the monster under every bed. He uses fake companies, shill buyers, hidden investors. This is organized fraud. But we can fight back. I will protect you, just like I always have. Mark almost laughed out loud at that. Protect them? She'd sold them dreams wrapped in rules, then drained their savings with petty fines and threats until they couldn't breathe, just like Denny that terrible night. He waited until she said it. He's here tonight. I know he is. Mark Peterson, show yourself. If you have any decency left, come face us like a man. Silence. Mark pushed the door open and stepped inside, ignoring the hush that swept over the crowd. He could feel the eyes, pity from some, fear from most, loathing from a few still loyal to Brenda's poison. He walked calmly down the aisle of folding chairs until he was close enough to see the sweat beating under Brenda's heavy makeup. Evening, Brenda, he said. His voice wasn't loud, but in the tense quiet, it hit like a shout. Brenda swallowed hard, but forced her plastic smile. Mr. Peterson, I'm so glad you could join us. Maybe you'd like to explain to your neighbors why you've been terrorizing them, stealing their homes. Mark cut her off without raising his voice. You want the truth? Fine. Let's talk about stealing. He turned, facing the rows of people who still clutched their HOA newsletters like Bibles. You all know my son, Denny. You all know he nearly died because someone shut off the only thing keeping his air safe. So your harmony wouldn't look ugly from the curb. A ripple of uneasy murmurs broke out. Brenda tried to interrupt, but Mark ignored her. I asked nicely. I offered solutions. I begged for mercy. Brenda laughed. So, I did what any father would do when cornered. I made sure no one could ever threaten him again. He pulled out a thick envelope and tossed it on the table beside Brenda's binder of violation slips. These are the deeds to the Bennetts, the Hendricks, and 3 more you don't even know about yet. And this he held up a signed motion, freshly notarized, Trevor's signature at the bottom. This dissolves your board. Effective tonight. Gasps echoed like gunshots. Brenda lurched forward, voice shrill now, pearls trembling at her throat. This is fraud. You can't do this. I own this neighborhood. No, Brenda. Mark's voice turned to steel. You own fear. That's all you ever had. And fear is cheap to buy out. A trembling old man in the second row stood up. So, what happens now? Mark met his eyes. Softer now. No more fines for mailbox height. No more threats for kids chalking on sidewalks. No more bribed inspectors shutting off medical equipment. You'll pay your dues, but every dollar goes into community upgrades and real help, not Brenda's vacation fund. A woman in the back began to clap. Another joined in. Then a dozen more. Brenda's face twisted, eyes darting for an ally, but none came in that moment. The house of cards she'd built with fear collapsed at her feet. Mark let the applause swell around him, but inside, he felt nothing but calm certainty. This wasn't revenge. This was correction. When the last neighbor left the clubhouse, still buzzing about freedom and fairness and second chances, Brenda remained frozen behind the folding table. Her hands clutched the edge like she might rip it from the floor and fling it at Mark. Mark stood a few feet away, calmly gathering the scattered papers Brenda had flung in her desperation to stop him. He looked strangely serene for a man who had just dismantled an entire board with a few signatures and a stack of debt papers. You think this makes you a hero? Brenda spat, voice cracking with exhaustion and humiliation. You ruined families. Mark. Families you pretended to care about. Mark slipped the last paper into his envelope. He didn't bother looking at her yet. No, Brenda. You ruined them. I just gave them a chance to start over, without you standing at their doors, measuring fence heights and counting petunias. Brenda pushed away from the table so fast. The chair behind her toppled with a metallic clang. You think you've won. I'll sue you. Fraud. Harassment. Mental distress. I have friends on the county board. The local judges' golf club. Mark finally looked at her. The softness he'd shown the neighbors vanished like mist under a blowtorch. His eyes were all ice and certainty. You're welcome to try. But every piece of paperwork I used is legal. Every debt acquired fair and square. Every vote counted. I didn't break a single law. You, though, he tapped the thick folder Trevor had handed him. Unlawful entry, forced tampering with medical equipment, fraudulent fines. I have the inspectors ready to flip if I want to press charges. Brenda's lips trembled. For the first time, her pearl armor cracked, revealing the thin-blooded fear underneath. You wouldn't. Mark leaned in just enough that she could smell the exhaustion, the wrath, and the father's love that made him unstoppable. I would, but I don't have to, because starting tomorrow, you won't have a house to run your show from. She flinched. What did you do? Mark stepped back and gestured to the only person left behind him. Trevor Hood stayed in the doorway all along. Trevor tossed Brenda an envelope. It slapped the floor at her feet. Your mortgage, Trevor said. His voice was shaky but resolute. Mark didn't just take the board. Brenda, he bought your debt too. You're 6 months behind because you used the equity to keep people loyal. But your people are gone, so you have 30 days to vacate. Brenda sank to her knees, clawing open the envelope, scanning for loopholes she knew weren't there. Her mind spun for a threat to spit back. But all that escaped her lips was a soft, rattled gasp. Mark didn't wait for her to beg. He turned to Trevor, clapped him on the shoulder. Good work tonight. Clean this up. I'm going home to my family. He left Brenda on the clubhouse floor, kneeling like a dethroned queen before her empty court. Outside, the night was crisp with a faint breeze rustling the sycamores along Willow Creek's perfect sidewalks. Mark breathed deep, filling his lungs with the air he'd fought so viciously to keep clean for Danny. For the first time in months, he didn't taste fear behind each breath. He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed Sarah. She answered on the first ring, her voice already tense. How did it go? Mark smiled, climbing into his battered pickup. It's over, love. She's finished. And Willow Creek is ours again, for real this time. On the back seat lay Denny's favorite stuffed dog, forgotten after yesterday's doctor visit. Mark picked it up, squeezed it gently, and felt a raw knot of relief break in his chest. He'd done terrible things, legal, but terrible. He'd pushed families to the edge, bought secrets like candy, manipulated fear like currency. But tonight, when he walked back through that front door, he'd looked Danny in the eyes, and now, no petty tyrant would ever steal his breath again. As the truck rolled away from the clubhouse, Mark didn't glance back once. Mark pulled into the driveway just past midnight. The porch light Sarah had left on for him glowed warm and steady. A lighthouse guiding him home through the storm he'd stirred Dot inside. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of Danny's air filtration system. That low, comforting thrum Mark had once taken him for granted, but now heard like a heartbeat. He paused in the hallway, hand on Danny's door. Through the crack, he saw his son curled on the bed, mouth open, chest rising and falling with clean, safe breaths. He could have watched that forever. Sarah appeared beside him, barefoot in her robe. hair tangled from sleep and worry. She didn't ask if he'd won. She saw it in his eyes. Instead, she rested her head on his shoulder, a silent thanks that said more than any words. "You did it," she murmured into the cotton of his shirt. "You really did it." Mark wrapped an arm around her. "We did it. You kept Danny safe, while I played monster in their shadows." "You're not a monster, Mark." But part of him wondered. Part of him always would. A week later, Willow Creek felt different. The new interim board, mostly quiet families who'd never liked Brenda anyway, worked fast under Trevor's cautious guidance. They canceled half the petty fines and used leftover HOA funds for a new community playground and a free medical help grant for any family that needed it. The first policy Mark personally signed off on. The gossip mill churned hard. Some neighbors still whispered about him at backyard fences. "Did you hear? He bought her house. He forced her out. He ruined half the block to get revenge." Mark let them talk. He'd spent too long caring what the perfect lawns thought. Now, when he walked Danny to the park, parents who'd once judged his ugly exterior, filters now nodded, eyes downcast, grateful the nightmare was over, but too proud to say so. Brenda's moving truck arrived on a Tuesday morning, just as the sprinklers hissed across her prized rose beds. Mark didn't watch her leave, but Trevor texted anyway. She didn't say a word. "She just glared at your house the whole time." Mark texted back, "Good. Let her remember whose kingdom this is now." That night, when Danny fell asleep, Mark and Sarah sat together in the quiet living room, the TV flickering some late-night sitcom they didn't watch. A sudden knock at the door startled them both. Mark opened it to find an envelope on the porch. No return address, just his name scrawled in a harsh, familiar hand. He didn't need to open it to know who had left it. Inside, a single page. Brenda's handwriting, neat but shaking. "You think you've won. But monsters never die, Mark. They just learn new tricks. Sleep well while you can." Mark read it twice. He almost laughed, but it came out as a sigh instead. He tore the note in half, then in quarters, dropping the pieces into the kitchen trash. Sarah watched him carefully. "Is it from her?" "Yeah," he said. He kissed her temple and smiled the same tired, triumphant smile he'd worn that night at the clubhouse. "She's right, you know? Monsters never die." Then he turned toward the hallway, where Danny snored softly in a bed paid for by every ounce of Mark's ruthlessness. "But sometimes," he murmured to himself, "the monsters protect their own." Outside, Willow Creek slept, lawns trimmed, fences painted, secrets quiet for now. But behind every perfect gate, people remembered what happened when you pushed a good man too far. And Mark Peterson, he slept soundly for the first time in years. The end.